Alright kid, get in here. You know the drill already. Get in here and have a seat. The Don wants to talk to you. You doing okay? Of course you are. You're above ground and you're still breathing. No matter what's going on in your life, knowing that you're still alive and you're still drawing breath, it's still going to be a good day. And now it's about to get even better because you're about to watch another video from me, Screwface Capone, the gaming mobster. This is guaranteed to be the highlight of your day. So if you've been following me for some time, and if you're new to the channel, thanks for joining me. You probably noticed that I like fighting games, even if sometimes I'm not particularly good at them. It's just something about the franchises, the characters, the movesets, combos. It just hits different from other genres. I get a feeling from fighting games that I can't get from RPGs, first-person shooters, sports games, or whatever else. I mean, it's not like I don't enjoy those games. I mean, I am the gaming mobster after all, but it's just something about the fighting genre that hits different. I've done several videos about fighting games. Matter of fact, I have a whole documentary series about one of my favorite franchises. And of course, two of my biggest videos from last year are about obscure fighting games. But like any genre, you got good games and you got bad games. And that brings me to today's video. Now, some time ago, I did a poll on my YouTube community tab in which I asked which topic that you wanted to see me do in the future. Of course, the bad fighting games got a majority of votes, which was 2 out of 4, but whatever. So this is the bad fighting games video. Of course, I'll be doing the other 3 topics eventually, but this one's gonna come first. Now, I have to warn you that I don't normally seek out bad games just to rip them apart. I'm not Angry Video Game Nerd, I'm not Angry Joe or any one of those guys. I'm gonna come in, I picked out 10 games I played that I think are crap, and I tell you why I think they're crap. I threw in some bleeped out profanity here and there for people who want to see that kind of stuff, but if you were expecting me to rage out and call this game shit or whatever, you're going to be a bit disappointed. So, and I know a lot of people are going to talk about why I left this game out, why I left that game out, but I'll probably be doing a follow-up, and that's what the comment section's for. So if you got any suggestions for games I should look at in a future installment, let me know. Also, for those of you who are new to the channel, I like to cover indie games, retro titles, and of course gaming related tech. I do everything from reviews, to previews, to unboxings, to even lists just like the one you're about to watch. So if that sounds good to you, you want to join the Mafia, all you got to do is hit that big red subscribe button and I'll make you a made man. In fact, if you want to do one better, make sure your notifications are turned on. Therefore, whenever I drop something, you'll be the first to know. So, without further ado, let's get started. Oftentimes you hear people say that it's not the graphics, it's the gameplay. Yes, the visuals are what's going to bring people to the game, but ultimately it's going to be the gameplay that makes or breaks it. It's the reason why all these games with simple or retro graphics are hitting harder than AAA Unreal Engine powered masterpieces. Check out games like Vampire Survivors, Minecraft, and Hotline Miami, and then compare them to more recent games like Suicide Squad vs. Justice League. In the 90s, no one game proved this phrase better than Rise of the Robots. Yes, the game had some of the best graphics ever on a 16-bit platform, but the gameplay was stir-fried. What's crazier is that this game had everything that it needed to be a good game. Obviously, the graphics were on point, and the cinematics looked cool too. Also, the game's development team was headed by a former member of the legendary Bitmap Brothers. Not only that, the game was going to have a soundtrack from former Queen guitarist Brian May. But when it actually came time to play the game, that's when things fell apart. The moves are hard to pull off, there's only one fighter that you can play as in the single player mode, and the 2-player mode is completely broken. Let me explain. While player 1 can only play as the blue guy, the second player can only play as the enemies, and since the difficulty scales with each level, picking one of the later enemies will make the second player cheap and overpowered. Oh, and all those cool Brian May songs? None of them made it into the game due to delays. Keep in mind that he had recorded an entire album of music just for the game. A sequel came out in 1996 for PlayStation and Saturn, which was said to be an improvement, but it was basically ignored. So yeah, Rise of Robots was hyped up to be the next biggest thing in gaming, but unfortunately it turned out to be one of the biggest clusterfucks of the 16-bit era. Yeah, I know you've seen this game before. Matter of fact, I mentioned it during my feature on Bloodstorm. And yes, any list of bad fighting games from the 90s is guaranteed to include this game. So I'm going to keep it short. Time Killers was one of the many fighting games that sprung up in the wake of Mortal Kombat and tried to out Mortal Kombat. And it went about as well as you could expect, meaning that it failed miserably. But to its credit, this game went the extra mile with its gore. Not only could you pull off fatalities, you could also cut off the opponent's arms during the match. You pick from one of several characters from across time and space, including a samurai, a Viking, and some cyberpunk goons. Again, this game had some potential, but the animation is choppy and the controls are terrible. There was a port for Sega Genesis that was delayed for 3 years. When it was finally released in 1996, it was clear that no improvements were made to the game, and it was even worse in the arcade version. The game's developer, Strata, would also release Bloodstorm. It's a bad fighting game too, but it's more like the funny kind of bad. Time Killers is just plain Best of Best should not be confused with the 1989 film about kickboxing. That's Best of the Best. Nor should it be confused with the 1992 Hong Kong action film of the same name. Nor should it be confused with the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo fighting game Best of the Best Championship Karate. No, this is Best of Best. By the way, that title is a fucking lie. Best of Best is a fighting game developed by Korean studio Soon-A, and it's as generic gets. And that's saying something even for the mid-90s fighting game boom period, where you had like Doomsday Warrior. So how bad is this game? For one, the game opens with an image of a generic looking martial arts fighter who isn't even a character in the game. When you start the game, you have your choice of one of several generic, stereotypical, bargain basement, great value looking fighters. You got the main character, and you know he's the main character because he rocks the tank top and jeans. You got an Arabian Sultan, you got a Rambo ripoff, and a wrestler who looks like Hulk Hogan. And when you pick your character, you get greeted by this girl in a tank top. So yeah, the game's basically your typical Street Fighter ripoff. Of course, you got these goofy looking poses and animations, which are good for a chuckle. Throughout the match, you get messages mentioning how unmanly your character is. And for some reason, when you win a match in single player mode, you get to change your character. The highlight of this game goes to the American stage. You know how in Asian media, especially Japanese and Korean stuff, you see a ridiculous overrepresentation of America? Check out the King of Fighters 97 USA stage and you'll see what I'm talking about. But in Best of Best, in the American stage, you fight on a boat, Statue of Liberty climbs on the rail to gawk at your unmanliness. It's not even that shit that gets me, right? You got this woman in a bikini who just strolls across casually like this is a thing that happens on a regular basis. Oh wow, the Statue of Liberty, cool. And there are no character storylines or endings. Once you beat the game, you just get this scene of you taking a victory ride while several bikini-clad models are cheering you on. I guess that's not the worst thing about this game though. And of course you got the high score screen with the picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who I'm sure has been compensated for the use of his likeness. Now, in all fairness, Soon-A and its catalog of arcade games do have a place in history, as it is one of the first Korean arcade game manufacturers. However, best of best can best be described as we got Street Fighter 2 at home. So, when I was growing up in gaming, anime wasn't as popular in the US as it is now. Of course, nowadays you can slap Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Punch, or Demon Slayer on pretty much anything, and it's gonna sell like hotcakes. But up until about the mid-90s, anime and manga didn't have the widespread audience that it does now and was more of a niche product. Therefore, a lot of games that were based on anime properties never left Japan, and in the off chance that they did, they would undergo a facelift of sorts. Case in point, if you grew up playing Nintendo during the 80s, you might remember when an NES Dragon Ball game got released in the US as Dragon Power, which would remove the Dragon Ball license. So instead of having a crappy game based on Dragon Ball, you now were stuck with a crappy game that looked like Dragon Ball and had an equally crappy looking cover art. This brings me to 1993 when Irene would bring over a Ranma half game to the Super Nintendo. But because the manga had yet to take off on our side of the Pacific, Irene would have the game renamed Street Combat. Not content with simply changing the name, Irene would have developer NCS give the game a makeover. The soundtrack was changed, character sprites were changed, and so were the backgrounds. So among other changes, Ranma in his female form got replaced by two versions of the same generic white guy with a blonde mullet. Jinma, the old man, was replaced by a black guy with a weird haircut. Kodachi was replaced by a clown, and Kunuo, and I know I butchered that pronunciation, was replaced by G.I. Jim, who is a guy ripoff with a sword. The game has a jump button and a special attack button, so you can tell that the combo system isn't going to be very complex. In the game's single player mode, you're restricted to both versions of the generic blonde white guy. In two player mode, you have to enter a code to play as anyone other than a generic white guy, because the developers couldn't be bothered to do a character select screen. So yeah, this game is pretty bad, but thankfully later that year, DTMC would publish the American version of Ranma Half Hard Battle for the Super Nintendo. Not only did this keep the license, but it was a much better game than Street Combat. You know, now that I think about it, if they were going to do all this facelifting to Street Combat, why not just change the C to the K and try to leech off Mortal Kombat? I'm sure there are a lot of consumers that would have been duped by thinking they were buying an actual Mortal Kombat game, but at least they could have sold a few extra copies. Now, the original Ranma Half game, which Street Combat was actually a conversion of, is actually a little bit better. That's not saying much, but compared to Street Combat, it might as well be Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Now, we all love Midway from Mortal Kombat, but let's be honest, every time they tried to replicate its success in the fighting genre, it's been a miss. That is unless you consider NetherRealm Studios to be Midway's successor, and in that case, the exception would be the Fantastic Injustice games. The biggest miss, however, is War Gods. War Gods was another one of those games that could have been something, but when you played it, that's when it fell flat on its face. The big selling point was that it was the first true 3D fighting game. You see, before then, you had games like Tekken and Virtua Fighter that had 3D camera work, but you still moved on a two-dimensional plane. War Gods allowed you to move in 3D by having players hold down the 3D button. You can already see the problem with this when it comes to the gameplay, because naturally you have special moves and combos that require use of the button. It makes things more complex than it needs to be, and that's if you're not playing this on N64. The character textures look janky compared to games like Tekken and Soul Edge. Even the textures and character models in Battle Arena Toshinden looked better than this, and this was a PlayStation 1 launch title. The only saving grace about this game is that Carrie Hoskins, who played Sonya Blade in Mortal Kombat, also plays as the character Vala, who's basically a Viking chick in a bikini. So while I'm on the subject, I want to go ahead and clear up a rumor about this game that's been going around for over 2 decades. It's been incorrectly stated that War Gods was meant to be a prototype for the gameplay and graphical engine that will be used in Mortal Kombat 4. I even got this wrong myself when I wrote about the game on Palette several years ago. The game didn't even run on Mortal Kombat related hardware. In fact, it used the same graphics engine that powered the racing game Cruisin' USA. Not only did Mortal Kombat 4 use a completely different graphics engine, it also had a completely different playstyle. And while it did feel plain compared to other games in the series, that's probably a good thing, because Mortal Kombat 4 played a million times better than War Gods. As for War Gods itself, even the novelty of being the quote-unquote first 3D fighter wore off, because not only did no one give a shit, but games like Power Stone and Soul Calibur did 3D movement way better than this game ever could. So yeah, War Gods ended up being another crap fighting game in a genre full of crap fighting games. The only difference being is that this crap fighting game was made by developers who are capable of doing better. If current projects are anything to go by, Double Dragon seems to be undergoing its midlife crisis. However, at one time, it was one of the biggest franchises in gaming, complete with a movie, the less said about that the better, a Marvel comic book, the less said about that the better, and a TV show, which was actually pretty good even if it didn't look anything like the video games. The TV show ran for 2 seasons and was basically G.I. Joe meets Power Rangers, complete with a public service announcement at the end of each episode. Too bad the game it's based on sucks. Unlike previous games in the series that at least had some involvement from Technos and were beat-em-ups, this was a one-on-one fighting game that was developed by Leland Interactive, who did the 16-bit versions, and Telegames, who did the Atari Jaguar version. Its cast consists of characters from the show, along with 4 original characters, including a dominatrix. The game even tries to rip off Mortal Kombat with what's called an overkill. If you finish your opponent in a certain manner, then you basically kill them. Thankfully, there's nothing too graphic. Some characters get reduced to ash and skeletons, others simply disappear, and then you have the dominatrix, who collapses into a pile of worms. Again, there's nothing that would be considered graphic. Still, these are basically fatalities, and along with the dominatrix, they're pretty jarring to have in a game that's based on a TV show that's meant for kids. The 16-bit versions are bad enough, but the Atari Jaguar version, despite being on a supposedly 64-bit platform, is somehow even worse. Not only are the graphics and music similar in quality to the 16-bit ports, but the game's cast is missing 3 playable characters. I suppose you liked the show back in the days and you'd probably get a kick out of this, but there are better one-on-one fighting games out there. Hell, if you want a Double Dragon fighting game, Technos did one of their own on the Neo Geo, and even though it's based on the movie, it's a much better fighting game than this pile of crap. Remember that 1991 Avengers arcade beat-em-up from Data East? Yeah, good times. Well, a few years later, Data East will put out another Avengers game. You probably haven't heard of it though. This time, it was a one-on-one fighter with pre-rendered Killer Instinct style graphics. And unlike the classic 1991 beat-em-up, it sucked. The game was based on the Operation Galactic Storm storyline. The game's roster is the first issue I got with this game. You get 4 Avengers and 4 villains. The Avengers consist of Captain America, Crystal from the Inhumans, Black Knight, and Thunderstrike. So basically you get Captain America along with 3 B-listers. There are guys like Iron Man and Thor in the game, but they were assist characters. More on that in a second. So if those are the heroes, who do you get to face as the villain? Doctor Doom? Kang? Thanos? No. You get to face Supremor! Dr. Minerva! Shatteraxe! Korath! Oh, and for the final boss, you get to face Galen Core! No doubt many Marvel fans were chomping at the bit to take down Galen Core! Actually, they were probably disappointed that they couldn't take on any more notable villain. Also, imagine being a casual Marvel fan at this time and the only Marvel material you know of were more popular franchises like X-Men, Spider-Man, and NFL Super Pro. Okay, maybe not that last one. You'll likely be looking at the cabinet and you would wonder just who in the these guys were. You had your choice of either playing in a 1 or 2 player story mode or a traditional arcade mode. One thing I'll give the game credit for is that once you beat the story mode, they sent you over to the arcade mode so you didn't get booted off the machine once you beat the game. The game would also be among the first, if not the first, fighting game to feature assist characters. After you picked your main character, you could choose from one of 4 sub-characters. The sub-characters that you could pick from were determined by if you were playing as a hero or a villain. This mechanic would make its way into better fighting games such as Marvel vs. Capcom, The King of Fighters 99, and the more recent Mortal Kombat 1. If you played as a hero, then you can pick from Iron Man, Thor, Giant Man, or Vision. So in other words, the assist characters were basically characters that should have been playable in the game. If you picked as a villain, then you can choose from Sentry, not that one, Atlas, Ronin, or Ultimus. Again, casual fans were likely wondering just who these guys were. Now, yes, some of them were in movies, but remember, we were over a decade away from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, let alone the first Captain Marvel film. Even as an adaptation of the Galactic Storm storyline, it fails in that regard because there's a ton of material that's left out the game. You had subplots about Deathbird assassinating the Kree military leaders, Avengers ally Rick Jones being kidnapped, and the Avengers being split down the middle due to one group of the team deciding to kill the Kree Supreme Intelligence. None of these things were reflected or even mentioned in the game. Hell, even in the roster, there are characters that were left out that would have fit the game perfectly, such as Binary, aka the future Captain Marvel, Cersei, Quasar, and Deathbird to name a few. Even if that wasn't an issue, the fact is you got some clunky gameplay, a basic looking roster, and the most generic final boss ever in a fighting video game. Perhaps the biggest nail in the coffin for this game is that a year earlier, Capcom released Marvel Superheroes, which is another one-on-one Marvel fighter. It had better graphics, better gameplay, a better roster, and was based on a more recognizable storyline, in this case, Infinity Gauntlet, and it's basically an all-around better game. In the same year that Galactic Storm came out, they re-upped with X-Men vs Street Fighter, and you know how that turned out. Now, in a perfect world, this would have been a solid video game from Data East. They might have capitalized off it and made some home versions, and there could have been a chance that they could have made enough money off this game to keep themselves in the black for a little bit longer. Sounds like a great episode of What If, right? Unfortunately, this is our universe where the game is crap. And compared to what Capcom was doing, this was just Data East playing around with some new 3D software, hoping to make one last attempt to capitalize off the Marvel license, but unfortunately ended up with another L as they slid off into bankruptcy. But I will give the developers props for using an obscure storyline. At the very least, they're fans of the source material. It's just that the execution turned out to be lacking. And when you factor in Data East's financial woes at the time, along with what Capcom was doing, this was basically a case of poor timing. Alright, so no doubt you stumbled across this video and you're wondering why I didn't mention the 3DO masterpiece, Way of the Warrior. Number one, I played it a few times but didn't get deep into it. You see, when I go over these games, I play them myself so I can make sure my opinions are my own. I'm sure Way of the Warrior sucks, but I'm not one of these guys who slams something just because other people slammed it. You know, like certain comic and movie content creators. And that brings me to number two. Everyone and their mama who covers retro games has already riffed on it. And three, that's what part two is for. Finally, what if I told you that there's an even worse Mortal Kombat ripoff than Way of the Warrior? Yup, and that game is called Survival Arts by Sammy. Yes, I'm sure Way of the Warrior is a bad game, but compared to Survival Arts, it might as well be King of Fighters 95. What's wild about this game is that it was developed by a Japanese company known as Scarab. In fact, this was their first game. Why do I say that's wild? Because usually Mortal Kombat ripoffs come from Western developers. So yeah, this game has all the hallmarks of any good Mortal Kombat ripoff. Poorly digitized sprites? Check. God-awful character designs that look like the devs bought body paint, styrofoam, and Spirit Halloween costumes? Check. Crap animation that looks like the actors were told to jump in front of this green sheet for a few hours? Check. Frustratingly cheap AI? Check. Bad controls? Yes. Nonsensical backgrounds including Viper Stage where who knows what the fuck is going on with these monks? Check. And there's the blood and gore. Check, check, and check. The game involves a tournament being held by a guy named Dantel, who wants to eat the winner's flesh or whatever. By the way, Dantel, who's the game's final boss, looks like an evil Richard Simmons. One thing this game does differently is that during the match, various weapons will appear, and if you hit your opponent with them in a certain way at the end of the match, that's how you trigger this game's version of fatalities. A Genesis version of this game was planned, but it was cancelled, and if the Genesis port of Time Killers told us anything, nothing of value was missed. Thankfully, the developer and publisher would both improve throughout the next several years. Sammy would obviously go on to publish better fighting games, such as the Rumblefish and Guilty Gear, while Scarab itself would go on to develop slightly better games, such as Fighting Vipers 2 and Z Nihon Pro Wrestling feature of Virtua for the Sega Dreamcast. Later, they would change their name to Field Plus and would develop games such as Moondiver, highly underrated by the way, please don't miss it, No More Heroes, Heroes Paradise, and Lost Odyssey. The third one they co-developed alongside Mistwalker, and that's another game you should check out. In 2010, the company would be merged with AQ Interactive. It would go on to make various mid-tier Japanese games before that company itself was merged with Marvelous Entertainment. So while they haven't done anything that would be considered groundbreaking, they've improved a lot since Survival Arts. Alright kinfolk, it's story time with the Don. Anyway, in Christmas of 1998, the Don and his younger bro got a Nintendo 64 for Christmas. With it, we got games such as Ocarina of Time, WCW NWO Revenge, and Deadly Arts. The third was a present from our late aunt. Let's just say one of these things was not like the others. Now, the N64 wasn't what you would call a fighting game powerhouse. Yes, it had Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, along with the masterpiece War Gods, but you wouldn't play the console for fighting games the way you would the PlayStation or Saturn. Deadly Arts from Konami was an attempt to change this, but it really didn't help matters. Deadly Arts was basically great value Virtua Fighter, or Teemu Tekken if you want. It's another generic 3D fighting game with generic character designs. Well, one exception is a zombie. The gameplay is clunky, and the camera movements can make things look awkward at times. So yeah, imagine if you will being a fighting game fan, but you only had an N64, while your friends had a PlayStation and Saturn. Your buddies are out here playing games like Bloody Roar, Tekken, Virtua Fighter 2, a shit ton of Neo Geo ports, a shit ton of Capcom ports, and you're stuck playing Deadly Arts. One thing I do like about the game is that it has a character creation mode. You create a character and train it against other characters to expand your moveset. You can then save them onto a memory card and take it to fight your friends. It's a pretty novel feature, even the creation aspects are limited, but good luck finding another person who has this game though. Another thing I like about the game is the music. If nothing else, the music kinda slaps. Of course, the game has no storyline, so you have no reason to give a about any of these guys. At least in the United States version. In the Japan and Europe version, where the game is called Gasp Fighters Next Stream, the game has profiles for its characters and something resembling a storyline. I mean, it's your usual guy holds a tournament to invite the strongest fighters, but it's more than what you get in the US. By the way, the GASP stands for Generation of Art, Speed, and Power. Also, you get cool nameplates when you select a character. Still, other than having a cooler title, cooler box art, and a storyline, you can pretty much avoid this game, no matter what country you're in. Deadly Arts proves three things. One, why you shouldn't let your non-gamer aunt pick out video games for you, God rest her soul. Two, why Konami has no business putting out fighting games, well, at least fighting games that don't feature the Ninja Turtles. And three, if you see the word arts in the title of a fighting game, it's probably gonna suck. Okay, so I know I used the word generic a lot throughout this video, and I'm really gonna overuse it in this segment. But honestly, generic is the only word that comes to mind when I play this game. I discovered Mighty Warriors as part of the Atari Game Station lineup, and as you can tell from the title, it's as generic as they come. I'm going to go as far as to say that while it's not the worst game on this list, it's definitely the most generic, and this is a list that includes Deadly Arts. Mighty Warriors was released in European arcades in the early 90s. It was developed by Electronic Devices and published by Electronica Video Games SRL. Besides the fact that Electronica is spelled without a C and has two T's, these company names are as generic as they get. The game's story, what little there is, involves warriors fighting against each other to earn the right to return from the dead. You get 8 characters to pick from, including Vikings, Roman warriors, Egyptian pharaohs, and other generic stereotypical looking fighters. The standout is an African with Wolverine claws. And of course, he's from Africa, and not any particular country in Africa. There aren't any female characters, and virtually all the men are shirtless. So if that's the thing you're into, have at it. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Now in all fairness, the game tries to throw some wrinkles in the formula. For one, each character begins with a weapon, and this weapon can break if the character takes enough hits. When the character loses their weapon, their moveset changes up. Before each match, you can pick a second character that you can mutate into, almost like a proto tag team mechanic. And each character's name is different depending on if they're on the player 1 side or the player 2 side. Finally, if you strike your opponent the right way at the end of a match, you can decapitate them. Again, compared to the other games on this list, it's not horrible, but it's nothing you should go out of your way to check out either. You see, everything that this game does, other 90s fighting games do better. Do you want a roster of fighters from throughout history? Play Eternal Champions or World Heroes. Want a weapons-based fighter? Play Samurai Showdown. Want blood and guts? Play Mortal Kombat or Bloodstorm. Want a fighting game with a tag team mechanic? Play Kazuna Encounter or X-Men vs Street Fighter. Want an all-male sausage fest of a roster? Play one of the Cho-Aniki fighting games. Want a game with an intricate combo system? Play anything other than this game. Alright, if you made it this far, then I thank you for watching and I truly apologize. Normally I like going over good games, but I made you guys sit through some real crap, and for that I'm sorry. But since you are at this point in the video, I want you to do me a favor. Go to the comment section and let me know the name of the worst fighting game that you ever played. The worst one that I played is obviously Rise of the Robots. And if you like what you just saw, make sure you hit that thumbs up icon, make sure you share to let your friends know, and feel free to hop in the comments and let me know what you think. I know I'll be doing a follow-up to this video at some point, so if you got any suggestions for games I should check out, or games you think I should avoid, then do let me know. And like I stated earlier, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to make sure your notifications are turned on. That way, whenever I drop new content, you'll be the first to know about it. In the meantime, and now that you're done watching me talk about bad retro fighting games, I'm sure you want to hear about some good retro fighting games. Well, you're in luck. Like I stated earlier, two of my biggest videos from last year were about good retro fighting games. Only thing is that these flew under the radar. But if you want to check them out, the videos just popped up on your screen, and I guarantee there's at least one game in these videos that you probably never heard of. Check those out. Until next time, I'm Audi 51000G, y'all.